Sorry about that. I had to set up the recording.
Oh, there you are.
I'm here. Okay.
Yay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our webinar series. We have an exciting presentation by Ermin King and Betty Haskin on arts access, ensuring inclusion and universal accessibility in the arts and healthcare. We at the Society and our consulting service want to thank you for participating in this webinar series, and we hope that you'll learn a lot of stuff. We want to acknowledge at the beginning the National Endowment for the Arts for its support of the consulting service, and of which this webinar series is a part. The way that we're going to structure the webinar today is that there will be two separate presentations, the first by Ermin and the second by Betty, and we're going to have a brief question and answer period after Ermin's portion, just so that we can address any pressing questions about her presentation, and then we'll open, and then Betty will give her presentation, and then we will have a longer question and answer period to cover questions from either presentation. And the breakdown in terms of time is about 20 minutes for each of their presentations and 20 minutes total for questions and answers. At this point, I'm going to put everybody on, I'm going to put myself and the presenters on lecture mode, so it's a sort of cut down on any feedback, but we'll shut off the lecture mode, obviously, for the question and answer portion. Actually, though, maybe that's not even necessary. You know what? If all of the participants who are not presenters would like to, could just put your phones on mute. We're a fairly small group, so I don't anticipate that there will be a lot of feedback problems. And then I won't put anybody on lecture mode until, unless noise becomes a problem. I don't know how rowdy a bunch you are.
Is it pound 6 or star 6?
I'm sorry. Oh, I'll do it. It's okay. Oh, to put it on mute?
Yeah.
Oh,
star 6.
Star 6.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's star 6.
If you want to put your own phone on mute, you can do that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I just wanted to notify you that this session will be recorded, and hopefully, if I can work this out with our tech support people, it will be posted on the Society's website under the webinar archives, in the next couple of weeks. Okay. At this point, does anybody have any questions before we begin? Okay, great. So I will turn the presentation over to who's going first? Sorry.
Ermin.
I just said that. Okay, I have to do yours. Okay. There we go. And Ermin, I'm going to hand over the controls to you as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Well, welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're with us. And I, as Michelle indicated on the opening slide, am both working with VSA Pennsylvania as manager of the Pennsylvania Cultural Access Project, and I also direct hospital and hospice programs for ArtStream in Bethesda, Maryland, in addition to being a society consultant. We're going to look today at how to establish universal accessibility in our programs, or to retrofit your programs if you need to refresh in this area. 1 in 5 Americans has a disability, and 2010 is the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, so it's an opportune time to assess in this arena. And just as the slide shows, the nation's only mural celebrating the contributions of persons with disabilities going up in Philadelphia on the site of Hahnemann University Hospital, and that's a process. Our implementation of universal access is also a process. We'll look first at some terms, and then we'll look at a variety of examples, best practices in this field. Universal design, or UD, really emanated from barrier-free or accessible design, which was complying with the minimum requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act in programs, resources, and environmental design. And often, separate and stigmatizing solutions came as a result of barrier-free design. But in universal design, there's no need for multiple separate adaptations because it embraces the widest range of people. And it also addresses both accessibility and inclusion. Accessibility is really implementing the strategies that provide access in an efficient, effective, easy to use, and satisfying way. For instance, to the right, before the Pennsylvania Ballet Nutcracker performance, when individuals with vision loss were invited, a touch tour was provided that made the show more accessible to them. And there they are touching the on-point calf and ankle of the Sugar Plum Fairy. Inclusion refers to a broad-based orientation which embraces variety and diversity, such as the orientation used by ArtStream, for which I work, and you see to the left their inclusive theater cast. And if you look carefully at the members, you can see the diversity represented in this cast. Accessibility is required to implement an inclusive perspective. And likewise, an inclusive perspective without accessibility that's practical in implementation is really null and void. When applied to learning, universal design is called UDL. And again, it accommodates differences and increases access. And CAST, a center near Harvard, up in Cambridge, or near Cambridge, is really the first definer of UDL. Why that's relevant to arts and healthcare is because arts learning happens in our arts and healthcare programs. In the image below, you see a youth with Snow City Arts Foundation in Chicago doing an Arts at Bedside project, and that youth is receiving academic credit from their school district for this project. The IDEA reauthorized legislation of 2004 tightened up accountability and accommodations in educating our nation's youth. So this is a wonderful law to provide a framework for our programs. One of our participants asked the question ahead of time about how can we advocate or help our organizations recognize why they need to implement a universal consciousness. And I think this list and the one that we'll see on the next slide help to provide a variety of incentives. We vastly, exponentially expand the numbers of constituents who can participate in programs. And as you see here with people's aging and survival rates increasing, that's a huge number of people. There are many benefits to applying UD and UDL. It just results in higher quality practice for everyone. And it not just only complies with the letter, but also with the spirit of the law. It distinguishes our organizations and leads to expanding funding opportunities. And it also generates creative solutions for the way in which we deliver and the locus of our projects and programs and extending their reach. Sometimes we can extend reach through a vehicle. And as you see here, we're going to focus on hospital audiences retrofitted omnibus, which accommodates individuals who are frail and elderly and also persons with severe disabilities. That even includes, in the bottom left image, taking people in hospital beds out, in this case to see the city lights in New York with musicians on board. Or wounded veterans can be accommodated in the slides on the right, even in a cultural tour, as we see at the Museum of Modern Art, or MoMA. Extending reach can happen by reaching out into the community right outside of our healthcare center. Cosa Cosa Arts in Healthcare nonprofit in Philadelphia worked as part of their Healing Art project with Temple Children's Medical Center and embraced the community to come in with patients, their families, and clinic visitors and create this metalwork Milagro amulet sculpture, Safe Harbor, right in the lobby of the healthcare center. And Cosa Cosa also took the work of pediatric artists and youthful artists in the broader community and put it in the Philadelphia International Airport in an 80-foot-long installation with over 1,200 clay sculptures depicting common human themes. A great way to get our programmatic work out and to make it inclusive and accessible to the community. And here we see that Independence Starts Here mural a little bit further along. The individuals represented are actual members of the community with disabilities. And the panels in the tapestry include the American Sign Language alphabet and panels in Braille with words such as community, inclusion, creativity, 7 stories high, and it is now completed. And MoMA uses time as one of their resources for access. On the day when the museum is closed, they invite in individuals with Alzheimer's, their family and professional caregivers, and trained museum educators, including, as you see on the right, an educator with a disability. So their staff is diverse also. Lead these individuals in dialogue about the art, during which no comment is considered extraneous or irrelevant. They've expanded their program nationwide, and the website at the bottom leads you right into their Meet Me guidebook that can be implemented through an adaptable resource in your program setting. Now, accessible environments that set the stage are not only physical environments, but also environments that include programs and resources. But we'll take a look here at a creative way in which the physical space can be made accessible. Coco Rains Associate in Boston developed this tactile and auditory, the tactile is the Braille component, handrail system. And I know many organizations use tactile wayfinding with tactile tiles that have been created by patients and family members, etc. Even an auditory wayfinding system as developed by Aesthetics out of San Diego and implemented in various niches and contours in the hospital setting. On the right, there are floor markings that, if tapped by a cane, for instance, produce an auditory sound, and a tactile map in the bottom left. Giggles Children's Theater at the St. Joseph's Hospital for Children in Paterson, New Jersey is accessible right in the healthcare setting in that the seats can be moved, the wall sockets provide access for patients with medical equipment, community members come in and perform in a regular series, and their performances are simultaneously broadcast on TVs. They're also done through internet too, and they're archived on DVDs that can be utilized at the bedside. Bingo is even produced, and librarians come in and use the document projector to simultaneously broadcast story time in conjunction with related art projects. This same Giggles Theater, using the Polycom technology, can allow patients to go on interactive virtual field trips, often art field trips, building puppets in Sicily. And you can see on the screen that there are patients and youth at the other destination as well, looking back and interacting with the patients here. For interactive online art making, ArtThread created a site, and thread-to-thread created art conversations can be held, especially for patients who may not be able to utilize their hands and arms easily in creating visual art. And then you see in the bottom right, on an LCD screen, the resulting virtual art products can be displayed, even with a schedule of what's happening in the arts and healthcare program. And not to overlook gardens, this memory garden was tailored for those with dementia or Alzheimer's and their caregivers. It's multisensory, the beds are at wheelchair accessible height, and when you step into the garden, there's an overlook so you can see the whole perspective, all principles that help to make this garden accessible. Playgrounds can be accessible, as this one at Children's Mercy Hospitals and Clinics in Kansas City. Persons on wheelchairs can actually create music as they enter the playground, rolling across the walking piano. And you see a little amphitheater with rolling sidewalks and accessible playground equipment there. Sensory studios, such as this one, also allow for access and inclusion. The child is sitting on a vibroacoustic bench. Through the child's movement, he or she can control the lights and sound through the sound beam, which emanates ultrasonic particles, and the child's movement breaks through the arc of those. The bubble tubes and the fiber optics can also be controlled by the child in this studio space. Now, we need to think about how arts access services and practices utilized in other arts venues can also enrich our programs. As you see here, there are a variety of universal access symbols that designate what access services are being utilized. Open captioning for audiences who are deaf and hard of hearing. Audio description for the blind and low vision. We have even checking whether you have a TTY phone that designates that you are accessible as an office space, Braille or large print programs, and sign language interpretation, which can even be done via iPod. We'll take a look at some of these services. Audio description is a free service. A patron obtains the equipment, wears the receiver and wears the earpiece and uses the receiver. We note that many people who are aging in our population are losing visual acuity, and a trained audio describer relays via transmitter and microphone the visual elements of an event through objective and well-timed description. Along with an audio-described performance, a pre-show sensory seminar or touch tour can be held. And you can even see the canes and the guide dog backstage. In this case, the dance performance allows us to touch the costumes, the point shoes, even the dancers, as we saw in an earlier slide. The Colorado Ballet regularly offers these, and sometimes tactile art projects can be done along with the tour and the audio-described performance. And then for art exhibits, here's an example of a project conducted in Florida and toured through VSA Florida. Feel the Art. High school students created original tactile adaptations of famous artworks. They were exhibited at wheelchair-accessible height, Braille and large print caption programs, and label and panel copy with an audio tour option by cell phone. Sign language interpretation and sighted guides were available. And at Penn State, where I worked, we paired the Feel the Art project with living multisensory art, where live actors in life-scale picture frames and shadow box sets allowed us to step into, for instance, a Van Gogh self-portrait or a Degas Dancer with Bouquets work, and actually touch, hear, in some cases taste or smell various aspects of the artwork. When we bring artists into healthcare, we need to think about bringing in artists and artistic groups that also embody a universal consciousness, such as Dancing Wheels. Now, the resource list that you have directs you to the National Center for Arts and Disabilities, which has an extensive list of integrated stand-up and sit-down dance troupes and other integrated arts ensembles. Thinking of bringing in theater groups, ArtStream and its inclusive theater companies. Every cast member has a mentor, so persons with disabilities are tailored in their role to their disability in these theater productions. Artreach in Philadelphia brought in Lisa Thorson's Jazz Art Signs. Now, Lisa is the singer in the turquoise with the magenta lapel. Beside her to the left is a sign language interpreter with her quintet. Above the bass player is the open captioning running by on an LED screen of the lyrics to the songs. There's a visual artist who's painting a sense of the kinesthetic energy of the performance, and Braille, large print, and even on-tape programming are provided along with audio description for this musical production. And in conjunction with Jazz Art Signs, the musicians went in to work with individuals with disabilities, as did an artist, and visual interpretations of the music were produced and exhibited. So workshops can be held in conjunction with performances that are accessible. Puppetry is a field that I love, and Kids on the Block out of Columbia, Maryland, produces educational puppet sets that address disability awareness and medical educational differences. They're carefully researched, and they also have troupes nationwide who can implement these puppet programs. We're going to move real quickly through multimodal processes and adaptive tools because arts therapists and other artists are masters at doing this in healthcare. Just an example, in this case, Kosa Kosa broke into panels the pieces of this Seurat masterwork, and they reimagined it accessibly as Sunday Afternoon on the Banks of the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. And using a pointillist dot technique, the artists with disabilities then were able to recreate their section of the work as if it were on the banks of the Schuylkill in Philadelphia. But I like who's in this work because I see someone with a cane, I see a person in a wheelchair, I see perhaps a signer in a sort of a chartreuse sweater standing, perhaps signing for someone. And again, thinking of who is in our visual images in healthcare. Do they represent the fullest extent of our population? Zott Arts out of Bayfield, Wisconsin. Dwayne Zott produces a variety of interesting tools that can make the visual arts process accessible. And again, there are websites at the bottom of each of these slides so you can go back and look more carefully. And at Elizabeth Seton Pediatric Center in New York, a kind of a sandwich-like approach to creating wheel art where the paint can be placed in between canvas covered with plastic, and patients in wheelchairs or residents can wheel over that and create painted designs, or the actual paint can be sprayed onto the wheelchair wheels and the designs can be created. And then they're often cut up and storytelling tents can be created from them. And here again, we see on the left the sound beam with the youth controlling it, even bringing up from the, sometimes hanging down on the lap tray and coming up, upper body work motivated by the sound and the light created with the ultrasonic microphone particles. And on the right, produced in Pennsylvania, is a multisensory Vecta Deluxe that includes aromatherapy, slides, as you see, stereo, the bubble tubes and switches and fiber optics as a portable multisensory tool that's great for creative drama, storytelling, and dance movement, or as a stimulus for visual art. I also just want to remind us that when we bring visual artists into healthcare, we want to think of visual artists who have disabilities, whose work can be celebrated. And then finally, our communications and products. Are they universal in perspective? Is our website, panel and label copy for our exhibits, our program calendars that note our performances and hopefully note them with those universal accessibility symbols that can be downloaded from the website that was referenced, and even a kiosk indicating what's happening, our newsletters, our information desk, any for-sale program products such as art note cards. And the little example there from the American Printing House for the Blind is not only tactile so that you can run your hand along the shape of the star and the woman's body and extensions with her arms and head, but also includes a Braille print greeting. I know some people even have business cards with Braille. And do we use multisensory approaches to evaluation? For instance, instead of pencil and paper, touchscreen laptops with pictorial software. And the BoardMaker software used by speech pathologists even allows for multiple languages and races to be represented in the images. For instance, if you use a pain scale as a rating scale for evaluation. Lastly, I'd like to suggest that rather than a top-down approach to access, that a fully fledged integrated approach be utilized, bringing on board and into being a committee on UD and UDL in your institution, and certainly including individuals with disabilities, arts specialists, and others. And it can promote a universal perspective, even in hospital tours and arts experiences. Sponsor UD awareness events, a film series, exhibits, displays, workshops, and performances. Hold sensitivity trainings. Even launch a buddy program for ADA compliance and accessibility, conduct violations checks, write notes praising positive developments, and plan a yearly UD celebration in October, which is National Disability Awareness Month and National Arts and Humanities Month. Well, at this point, I'm going to stop for a moment, and I'm going to address one question that did come up, which is, are there any kind of catalogs or online listings that show where accessible events, exhibits, and other types of arts events are happening? And I want to direct your attention to the resource list. And on page 6 of that, I believe you'll get this and be able to look at it after the webinar. There's a whole section on accessible cultural events calendars. One out of Artreach in Philadelphia, for instance, called Independent Starts Here, notes numerous events in all arts disciplines and the types of access services that are provided along with them. So are there any other questions at this point?
Ermin, I was just going to add, this is Betty. I was just going to add, in regards to that question, that on the Art Beyond site website, there is a way to get to a listing of particular organizations that are take part in Art Beyond Site Awareness Month, which is also in October. So
that's great.
I can follow through with that website on our other additional material. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions from participants, at this point we're going to switch over to Betty and for part 2 of the Arts Access webinar. And Betty, I'm about to give you the controls.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I just want to add my welcome to Ermin's, and glad you all are here, and we will walk you through the presentation that's probably a little more hands-on, and Ermin was wonderful in giving us the broad view, so I will try to be a little more specific about some of the things that we have utilized in our program here at Duke. So just in thinking about a little bit about what we're going to cover, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do here at Duke, and we're going to look at a little bit at institutional considerations, what might be already in place for you if you're starting a program or if you're sort of retrofitting a program. We're going to talk a lot about how to be informed, how best to serve your participants, to support your artists and other facilitators, and then evaluation. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Our program here at Duke is called Health Arts Network at Duke. We say HAND. It was founded in 1978. It's one of the older arts and healthcare programs in the country. And as you see here, we have all disciplines. My area of expertise and my sort of domain is the Eye Center Arts. Duke Eye Center is a freestanding clinic building next to Duke Hospital, and the keystone of our program is really our Touchable Art Gallery, and that is the part of our program that we've had the longest. It was the focus of the program for many years. Its accessibility is inherent in our mission, which is to make the visual arts accessible to everyone, regardless of their ability to see. We are staffed by volunteer docents and a coordinator. That would be me at this point. This is a young boy from the School for the Blind who is discovering a quilt that was made particularly for the gallery. It's a three-dimensional tactile quilt. We have, over the years, had several docents who have been visually impaired and 2 docents who have been totally blind. So that's one thing that Ermin had mentioned, and it's been a real positive experience for us in including people who are visually impaired in our services to others. The major part of our program is a pediatric art cart. It serves children who are waiting for eye appointments and also children who are waiting for eye surgeries. It was added to our program about 5 years ago. About 8 years ago, we looked really carefully in the HAND program as a whole as how we can direct more participatory programming within our purview. And this meant that we were adding volunteers, there was more training that would be involved, and there were many more accessibility considerations. But enough of what I do. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing or planning to do, where to start. So if you're in an institution or an organization that is already founded, there are ADA policies or institutional guidelines already in place. You may want to find out if there's a need for you to create a policy for your particular program if you're beginning a new program, an accessibility policy. So you might want to think about who can help you create that policy. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are offices of accessibility and institutional equity in many places, and you don't really have to make it up by yourself. So don't let that be something that holds you back. I included this photo because on the right, I'm in the middle, and on the right is one of the gentlemen who volunteered for us for about 10 years and who is blind. He started really pretty close to the beginning of the time that I started here at Duke. And we had never had a volunteer who was visually impaired before. But as we discussed it, we couldn't really think of any reason. When the inquiry came in, we couldn't really think of any reason why he couldn't be a volunteer. And in fact, he was a wonderful volunteer. Helped me a lot in understanding the issues that people who are visually impaired have, and he was extremely valuable to me, to the program, and also very challenging at times to work with a person who is totally blind. So we got real inventive in the kinds of adaptations we made. I just want to say to you, and you're doing this actually, being part of this webinar, but be proactive, be informed, know where you can get accessibility services if you're going into an institution. Who do you contact for the accessibility? There's somebody there. Your Office of Accessibility can help you with that. Also find out what to do in emergency situations, and I'm talking about emergency situations which might be specific to someone who has a disability. So you really need to know when you're putting your programming in place, what is the individual, who is the individual or the position that you can go to in an emergency situation, and it may be somebody like a charge nurse on a hospital unit or something like that. So that's always something that you want to keep in mind, whether you're the facilitator or whether you're training artists to be facilitators. So also I want to say, know what responsibilities belong to others and what responsibilities belong to you as an artist or arts facilitator. There are often things that we think we have to take on, but we don't. So there are other people that may be able to assist us in health issues and emergency issues so that we can concentrate on the arts programming. The students shown in this slide are from our School for the Blind, and are enjoying a very large clay sculpture that one of them has made. And I just put this up here to remind you that the folks that need accommodation in your programming can be anyone. They can be the artists themselves, as Ermin mentioned. So in terms of successful programming, when you begin a new program or considering what you're doing now, you want to make sure that you know your participants, whom are you serving, and how they're going to participate. It's another step in planning, but it's a good step in being proactive. So you'll want to think about, are your participants listening or watching, or are they more involved? Are they creating? Are they making a tour of a gallery? All these things will be important, as well as the kinds of challenges that are unseen. Sometimes participants have disabilities that we don't see, first of all. So who can help you understand the kinds of needs your participants may have? You can always go to the participants themselves. They're well informed, as their families and friends probably are, or staff members. So all these people can be resources for you in understanding the needs of people with disabilities. And in addition, you need to think about, in terms of working with folks in a creative process, will they need extra time? Will they need extra help? What does that mean in terms of your programming? Do you need to find extra volunteers? Is an extra staff member going to be hired to accommodate folks who have disabilities? And most of all, don't underestimate the abilities of your participants. This young girl is from our State School for the Blind and was part of a summer arts program in 1999. And she made an incredibly large, beautiful sculpture. So sometimes participants can surprise you in their abilities, and I think we always have to be open to that. Well, what kind of accommodations are available? There are lots of accommodations that are available you don't have to create. Once you understand the needs of your participants, you can identify tools They may be raised drawing kits. It may be a particular table. It may be just a grip on a paintbrush or a pencil. It's always appropriate to ask, how can I help you? Just as we would ask someone who was standing at the corner with a white cane if you could help them across the street, it's very appropriate to ask a person whom you perceive to need accommodation if they indeed need help. They may feel completely competent with an activity that you think they might not be able to do. So always ask. Don't assume you know the answer. You may also have to think about what kinds of accommodations are not out there in the world that you're going to have to create or develop. This easel was designed and created by Marlene Alexander, who is an artist and a teacher in Oregon, and she works with people who have disabilities in terms of skiing accidents and things like that. So this young man is a quadriplegic, and Marlene was able to design this easel so that he can paint with holding a brush in his mouth and have access to his paints and his canvas and his easel all in one. In terms of getting started in your programming, you always want to begin where your participants are. Sort of take their cultural pulse. You might say things like, what do you like to do? Or tell me about your experiences with art. Or how do you like to experience the world? So that you understand where your participants are starting. And then also you need to be really clear about your particular mission. It may be something as simple as you want to engage your participants in a positive arts experience. Whatever you decide about your mission, or whatever you've decided that your mission is, you want to try to offer a range of levels and choices in terms of participation. For instance, the young girl that's shown here, she might have had her hand on the back of my hand and her fingers put through my fingers so that I could guide her touching if she was uncomfortable initiating touching herself. I might simply guide her own hand if she were comfortable touching this. She might want total freedom to touch and explore this marble sculpture on her own. It happens to be a piece that was made by an artist who is blind. There is a Braille label on the counter next to this piece, so she can read the Braille label herself as well. If I had more space and a studio near our gallery, I could set it up so that visitors could touch the sculptures we show and draw them on raised drawing paper. So there's all kinds of ways to allow for participation on different levels. Here's a young lady who's chosen a fat dot marker over the more slender Crayola markers. And my guess is that she's chosen this fat dot marker because it's simply easier at her age and her size to hold. So your participants will also know how to be resourceful. Let's talk a minute about support for our facilitators. And when we speak of our facilitators, we're really talking about our artists, our artists who are volunteers, other trained volunteers. In working with people with disabilities, it's a lot. It can be very stressful. It's not unlike working with people in any healthcare situation. So, in order to make sure that our facilitators are having a positive experience, we want to make sure that they're well supported. Of course, training is important, and I touched on a little while ago being prepared for an unexpected emergency that might be connected to their disability or to their health situation. But also you may need to think about, in general training, if you're working with people with disabilities, how that's going to affect the way you deal with emergency situations, such as a fire evacuation or a tornado evacuation, that kind of thing. It's very important in terms of supporting facilitators also to have them have appropriate training in the art form that they're using and understand what kinds of adaptive tools and materials they need to use. And then the third way that we in our program support our facilitators is through group sharing and what therapists call supervision. So we're really meeting on a 4 to 6 week basis with everyone to debrief, to check in, to ask them how's it going, what's working, what are your challenges, and then how to solve the challenges. It could be that one artist or a facilitator has had a particular experience that's a good experience that can inform the others, or that's had a difficult experience that can inform the others so that they may know what's coming up, or if they ever get into this situation, what the best way is to solve it. What we realize also is that we don't always have an immediate solution to some of these things that come up. And that we don't necessarily have to fix it right then and there. So, in thinking about it, the initial solutions aren't always the best, and sometimes we reconsider and come back with another solution. I'm going to skip past this program evaluation, and we can come back to it if you all want to. But as Ermin mentioned, I just wanted to touch on the fact that to be thinking about with your programming and evaluation tools, how can you accommodate people so that they will be able to participate in surveys. Perhaps you will need someone observing them if they are unable to participate in the survey in any way. People responding to surveys may need assistance. You may need to have an interviewer or an interpreter there to help with a survey. Other comments and feedback can be captured in a written form, but also in voice recorder. They can be scribed, that kind of thing. So before you put in place your evaluation tools, you might want to think about how they can be adaptable to people who have varying disabilities. In terms of program evaluation, I wanted to share these pieces. The pieces at the bottom are what we call healing mandalas. They're made from recycled clean medical waste. And for me, they talk a lot about sorting and analyzing data and reporting the data. So for me, the way that these mandalas were created is really reporting the data of the clean medical waste back to us in a really beautiful form. Okay, any questions at this point? What questions do you all have?
I actually have a few, this is Michelle, I actually have a few questions that were sent in advance by some of our participants.
Sure.
And so I'd like to start with those before we open the floor to live questions, just to make sure that we get all of these addressed. So one of the questions is, what are best practices for inclusive education programs in a community center setting?
Well, this is Ermin. I'll just speak up about that. I think certainly I think one needs to look at the accommodations that are provided, the access services that are provided, because a community arts setting could be not just the visual arts, but also integrate the performing arts, as we saw. And are the universal access symbols being used in program announcements and dissemination of information about the program? Are artists with disabilities involved in developing the programs and in leading the programs or in the displays? And certainly, are the displays accessible? Are the evaluation tools accessible? These are some of the components that would characterize what is a best practice.
Okay. And do you have any suggestions for hearing loss assistance at events beyond signing?
Well, will just speak up and mention that persons who are deaf sometimes, but not always, of course, know American Sign Language or one of the sign languages. But I'm learning increasingly that there's a vast number of people who are hard of hearing beyond the deaf, and without open captioning that we saw, particularly in that one jazz art signs slide, they are not going to be able to access, oftentimes even when an assistive listening system is in place. So open captioning is really the final goal to make the arts accessible for persons who have hearing loss. And it can be combined, of course, with sign language interpretation and assistive listening systems.
Here's a question about encouraging local venues to adapt their exhibits and locations to be more acceptable. What are some strategies that either of you have found success in?
One of the things that the community can certainly do is to request things like touch tours or assisted listening devices, so that the people who are actually advocating for the services can be the audience, can be the patrons. And if they go to a museum, for instance, and it does not offer any kind of touch tour or accessibility for people who are visually impaired, then the blind community may be very strong in advocating for that. And that's one of the things that we do with our program, is to advocate for patients in their home communities, because we're here at Duke and so many people come from different places. We're happy to put them in touch with museums, galleries in their home areas, or we're happy to be in touch with those people and advocate for that.
And I would just add to that I think to the extent that you develop a UDL committee, as was mentioned, or resource group, even if it's a number of different organizations in your area joining together to work collaboratively on these UD solutions, that can be a real strengthening approach.
Okay, that I think finishes up the questions that weren't addressed by the presentation itself and were submitted online. I see a question. Okay, from Stacy Brennan. Could you please speak about the resources, both financial and staffing, that need to go into offering accessible and inclusive services? Great question. Either of you.
Well, I'll just start on that one. I'm sure. I will say that as was indicated in the list of reasons why this is a very compelling approach to take with a universal lens or perspective, in addition to complying with the law, of course, the funding opportunities are really manifold in this arena. And one of the things that your resource list includes is a list of grantors who specifically give in this area. And I mean, I have found that the grants just start to roll in when you target appropriately to the funder and have a program that is inclusive to propose to them.
Irma, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I'm just going to, this is Betty, I'm just going to add.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Really mixed up your voices.
That's okay. When, as was touched on just a little bit, when you're planning programming for people who have disabilities, you need to think about what that means in terms of mobility and extra hands, extra help. Sometimes where you think one artist might be able to handle a sort of a classroom and educational situation, you may need more than one person, because one artist may not be enough, or an artist may need a couple of helpers in there. So just in terms of staffing, you need to think sort of globally about what population you're serving and what kinds of help they may need. And do you need to increase staff as well, medical staff, in terms of being present at a creative or art activity.
And I just wanted to add one other point also. Many of these UD solutions are low cost or no cost as well.
All right. Does anybody at this point, does anybody have any questions on the phone that have come up from all that you've heard today? Oh, no questions, huh? Wow. All right. Well, do you, Betty, maybe want to talk a little bit about the evaluation slides that we bypassed?
Yeah. Can we go back to that?
Sure. Just let me know where
we're... One more back. Okay, yeah, and just go forward one from here. Yeah.
And if you just say next, I'll just move.
Sure. So in thinking about program evaluation, the tools and design of your evaluation really need to be decided ahead of time. You need to be flexible in terms of what kinds of questions you pose. So just to give you an example, when I first started with the art card and I had a daily log form, I had a question on it, something like for the facility to fill out, like how was your shift today? Well, that wasn't getting the kinds of answers that I was looking for. It was like, it was really fun to be with the kids, and I had such a good time, and it was a great group today. So I reformulated the question using a technique from Liz Lerman Dance Exchange. And the question now says, what was stimulating, surprising, touching, or memorable about today's session? Then I get the kind of feedback that is really helpful in my evaluation practices. So that's something that if you can really target what kind of information you want, that's really helpful. Okay, next slide. And then you also need to think about when you're doing evaluation, what is it that you're trying to get at? What's the question you want answered? What do you want to find out about so that you can really decide how you think you want to use the information that you collect. And then also in terms of evaluation, you're going to want to think about when you want to evaluate a program. And I always advise people to do an evaluation. Don't wait until the very end of the project to do your evaluation, say at the end of an artist's residency or something like that, because that doesn't give you the ability to make any adjustments. So sometimes you don't have things quite right, and you want to be able to adjust midstream. So that's when it's helpful if you have a little pilot project that you try, and you can do an evaluation at the end of that, or if you want a sort of a mid project or evaluation, that's really helpful too sometimes in being able to look at the results and adjust your programming so it's a better fit for your particular participants. And then, of course, as we mentioned, when there are folks who are have disabilities and they're in your program, you may want to think about observing participants, let's say, who have Alzheimer's, instead of thinking about surveying them. It may be that a staff member can give you cues about, well, how many times did the participant need to be redirected as opposed to, another activity. You might also want to think about people who may not be able to fill out a survey but may be able to respond. So do they need to be interviewed? Do they need an interpreter? Is English not their first language and they are wanting to respond and enjoy the programming but need someone to help them with a survey? And also, when you collect participant comments, as I mentioned earlier, they can be written, and in fact they often are, but could they be collected on a digital voice recorder? Could someone else write them down for that person? And all these are pretty easy means to capture comments and other kinds of feedback, but then in terms of evaluation, you need to know how to capture all that. Does somebody have to enter it into a database? Does somebody have to analyze it? So it's just thinking about evaluation methods and tools up front, and being flexible and being ready to adapt those if you have participants who need the adaptation. Okay.
Right.
Any questions about that?
Oh, we have a. I think you guys must have given a very thorough presentation. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I guess we'll close the session today. I'd like to remind participants that you will be getting an evaluation email, an email asking for you to complete an evaluation of this webinar, and we encourage you to please fill that out. It'll only take a couple of minutes, and those evaluations help us to continue to improve our webinar series.
Hi,
hello?
this is Alyssa. Just wondering, you've mentioned a couple of times the resource list and the presentation. I'm assuming it's a PowerPoint type of thing. I'm wondering if both of those things are going to be available.
Right, those are available on the Society's website. I was just you got me right before I was going to mention
sorry.
that. No, that's fine. Ermin has prepared a rather extensive resource list, and it is posted on the Society's website under, if you go under webinars, and then if you scroll all the way to the bottom where it says past webinars or webinar archive, you'll be able to find this webinar and all of the supporting documents for it.
Okay,
so
great.
You'll find PDFs of the PowerPoint presentation as well as that resource list.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
If I may just quickly add to, I believe it was, well, I don't know who asked the question about exemplars or best practices, but part of what's on that resource list is a partial list. We can't be comprehensive of some really exemplary organizations in their application of universal principles. So you'll find those there.
Great.
And Michelle, I was just going to say, this is Betty. In addition, I am happy to send you a resource list for art materials and other supplies that people might find useful. So if that's something that people use, I will send that.
Right. That's something that I think would be very useful to people. And I forgot to mention that you also said that you were going to supply a resource. And as soon as I get that, I'll post that to the website as well.
Good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for participating, and thank you, Ermin and Betty, for a very informative session about accessibility. I know I learned a lot about it, and I really love moderating these webinars because it's like a crash course in all arts and healthcare topics.
Great. Well, it was very enjoyable. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.